Chapter 12 Robin Hood. In medieval England, there ruled a king named King Richard. He was an honest and religious man, but his brother, Prince John, was an evil and greedy fellow. He plotted against the people and robbed them of their money. The Sheriff of Nottingham was his evil partner in extracting money from the simple villagers. Robin Hood was an ordinary man who lived in a small village near the Sherwood forest. He was a kind and simple man and spent most of his time making arrows for his long bow, a weapon he was very good at using, and helping people in need. Once Robin Hood killed a deer in the Sherwood forest. The villagers were not allowed to hunt in the forest as it was reserved only for the rich and influential people. The Sheriff of Nottingham sent his men to catch Robin Hood, but he escaped in the forest and became an outlaw. Soon many other people joined him and he became their leader. Little John was one of his most faithful companions. Robin Hood vowed that he would not spare the rich, he would rob the rich and give to the poor. The village people loved Robin and they helped him to live in the forest, giving him food and shelter when he needed it, and in return Robin protected them from the king and his knights. In course of time, the rich were so scared that they stopped going through Sherwood Forest because they knew that Robin Hood and his men would attack and rob them. The pressure mounted on the Sheriff of Nottingham to arrest Robin Hood. He had placed many rewards for the capture of Robin Hood, but it was not easy to catch him, for he had a number of men who loved him. They acted as informers and warned Robin Hood whenever the sheriff had any new plan to catch him. At last, the sheriff went to take the help of Prince John, but he refused to send any of his men to help in the capture of Robin Hood. One day, Robin Hood saw a potter's cart passing through the forest. Robin Hood stopped the cart and asked the potter where he was going. When the potter said that he was going to Nottingham to sell his wares, Robin Hood made a plan. He asked the potter to change their clothes. The potter agreed, and soon Robin Hood looked like a simple potter who made and sold earthen pots. Robin Hood set off for the market with a plan to annoy the sheriff. He arrived in the market square and began to sell the pots for very little. It was not long before everybody was coming to the potter's cart to buy a pot. A knight was passing that way. Robin Hood called him and giving 2 pots, said, "Excuse me, knight, would you please take these 2 pots to the sheriff's wife? They are my finest pots, and I would like her to have them." The knight agreed and took the pots to the sheriff's house. Very soon the knight returned and asked the potter, who had now sold all the pots, to follow him to the castle. Robin Hood, still in disguise of a potter, followed the knight. Soon they entered into the Nottingham castle, and Robin Hood was produced before the sheriff's wife. "These pots are wonderful," she said. "Please stay for a meal with my husband." Robin could not believe it. He would be eating at the same table as the sheriff. How surprised would Little John become when he would hear it, he thought. Very soon a number of delicious dishes were served on the dining table, and the sheriff joined him to lunch. During the meal, Robin heard 2 of the sheriff's knights talking about archery. "I can shoot an arrow." "Robin Hood in disguise. Robin Hood taught me the art." The sheriff looked at the potter and asked him if he knew where the outlaw was. "Oh yes," replied the potter. "I can take you to him if you desire." The sheriff at once grabbed the opportunity. The next morning, a disguised Robin led the sheriff and 2 of his trusted knights into the forest. They rode on and reached deep into the forest. Now the potter stopped and took out a hunting horn. He blew it quickly, and suddenly the sheriff and the knights were surrounded by a band of outlaws. Little John called out, "Potter, did you see your pots?" The sheriff turned towards the potter and understood who he really was. He was fuming in rage. Robin Hood had tricked him. Robin Hood began to laugh and took out the money bag to the sheriff. The knights were relieved of their swords and then sent back to Nottingham. When the sheriff and the knights had left, the outlaws looked into the money bag. It must have had at least £100 inside. Robin Hood gave the potter more money than he had expected to make from selling the pots, and he returned home smiling. At Nottingham Castle, the sound of the sheriff's shouting could be heard all around the city. The sheriff's wife laughed and said, "You have been tricked by a very clever and charming man."